Howdy, friends and floorheads. This episode is a break from my standard format. Clint from the Claim to Game podcast asked if I wanted to collaborate on an episode. I am a fan of his pod and jumped at the opportunity. Clint and I talk about how to find a good fit RPG for your gaming group. How do you sort through your shelf of shame to figure out what is the best thing to run next? You really should check out his podcast, Claim to Game. Clint has a unique perspective and approach to talking about RPGs that make his pod stand out. Now, this episode, it was released on both his feed and, of course, you're listening to it on mine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Clint.
This is Barney from Parable Games. When I'm not making terrifying role-playing games, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Hey, Clint here. Since this episode is so good, I did not want to interrupt the flow that Craig and I have here, weaving golden words of inspiration. So before we begin, I want to ensure any fans of Third Floor Wars Tabletop Talk who are new to listening to my work with the Claim to Game podcast take advantage of the dedicated freebie that I made specifically for you. It is a quiz, which, if you answer each question honestly, will guide you to one game you may or may not have considered to run for your gaming table. Just click on the link in the show notes, bonus.claimtogamepodcast.com/free RPG quiz. I put a lot of time and love into crafting the questions to lead you to some really great games. Thank you, and now on to my interview with Craig Shipman. Which tabletop RPG is a good fit for your gaming group? There are so many tabletop RPGs that you can choose from, it can be overwhelming which one to pick. But this may be the most important thing you do as a GM. In this episode, Craig Shipman of Third Floor Wars Tabletop Talk helps us hone in on three main considerations when choosing a game to play. What does a good fit game look like for the GM? What does a good fit game look like for the players? Are there differences between playing in person or online? We even go a few levels deeper by asking, what kind of genre and vibe do you want for your game? What level of world simulation and detail do you want your game to carry for you? And does a pre-made setting or open world setting matter when choosing your game? This conversation is great if you are a game master or inspiring game master and want both you and your players to have loads of fun. Welcome to Claim to Game. We help tabletop gamers have a great time with friends to experience amazing stories. It can be overwhelming to start and run great games. Let's make it easier for you to play any game you want to have fun with your friends. I'm Clint Shire. I've helped thousands of students in my career find their way to better themselves and better their game. With more than 10 years experience coaching, teaching, and developing easy-to-follow learning plans, I know I can help you too. It's time for you to make your claim to game. Today, our focus is how do I decide what game fits my table? And we had a discussion about this because I wanted to call it the right fit game. And you were like, Clint, no, it can't be the right fit game. It has to be a good fit because there's many games that could be a good fit. So, Craig, why does this even matter? Why do we even need to be talking about this? Why should game masters put some level of consideration into a good fit game besides just pulling it off the shelf and start rolling dice?
Well, I think, Clint, it's not just why does it matter. I think it is the most important thing you do as a GM. I don't think there's anything else you can do as a GM that's more important than this. I like the order in which we're covering things because I think it presents a very strong hierarchy. GMs will often find themselves in a trap where I've got to find the right game for my players. That's fine, but that's step two, right? The first thing you need to do is find the game for you because you're going to be the one GMing and running it. But it's critical. And that's coming from somebody who's a strong believer in system matters. So I'm a very big believer, that game that you pick and the system really is important, but that's a far distant secondary to the type of stuff we're talking about today.
When I think of why do I choose or care so much about a game, it does start with me.
Yeah.
I'm usually the GM. I'm the forever GM in most of my groups. It's rare that I get to be a player. And when I do think about the game, it has to start with me. I have to be excited about it. It has to be something I'm pumped about. Usually it's something nostalgic from my childhood that has now become a tabletop RPG of some sort. That's usually
and
how
now you have
I
adult
jump
money and
into it.
adult time, so you can indulge the child, Clint.
That's right. Yeah, indulge my inner child that was stifled as a babe. So we both agreed this matters.
Yeah.
And it's the most important thing. We're going to break this up into 3 parts. I'm very systematic in the way that I think about this. So this is how I felt we needed to talk about this tonight. We're going to identify what a good fit game looks like for a GM. And then we're going to go into the players at the table. What does it look like a good fit for the players at your table? And after this, we can hem and haw over in-person versus playing online. You have a lot of experience playing online. I play online, but I think my most confident moments are playing in person,
Right.
at a physical table. And then we can sprinkle in, different GM elements that might flavor why you would choose one game over another based on your personal preference. Are you game, Craig?
Let's do it, my friend. Let's
right.
do it.
What in your mind makes a game a good fit for a game master? For you?
For me, and then I'll probably extend it beyond me. But I've got a kind of a weird process. The first thing to understand is that I have 2 different hobbies here. I've got buying and reading RPGs, and I have running RPGs and playing RPGs. And those are 2 different hobbies for me. I enjoy both of them a lot. But people talk about their shelf of shame. That is part of my hobby, is my beautiful shelf of all of these, gorgeous books of games I'll never run.
That's all below me right here in my desk. They're stacked. They're stacked at least 10 feet high.
The reason it's called Third Floor Wars is the 3rd floor of my house is my hobby room.
Okay.
And it's embarrassing for me. And it's a little unique, and that's why I'm going to talk beyond me. But for me, I have to visualize running the game. So I will read an RPG, go through it, and then I sit on it. So it's not uncommon for me to go to 6-8 months between first engaging and deciding I think this is the game I want to run and actually committing to running it, because somehow in that period of time, I have to imagine me running the game, and I have to visualize and understand what does it look like when I run Blaze in the Dark. And once I have a sense of what that is, then I know I've got the right game. It's time to then decide, for me, I'm lucky because I have, hundreds of potential players to pick from. So for me, it's finding the right players. But for my locals, the next thing is for me to decide, is this the right game for my locals? I think expanding that out though, Clint, where that extends to is you have to be excited. Like you have to be like, I cannot wait to run this game. I can't wait to prep for it. I can't wait to get other people excited about it. I can't wait to think of my own scenario or to play this scenario that I bought or that's in the back of the book. Like you have to be literally your seams are breaking. You're so excited, because if you don't have that, everything is going to fail. It doesn't matter how much your players love the game. If you don't have more excitement than they do, it's going to fall apart.
It's contagious. Yeah. When you were talking and you said, I'm excited, I have to be excited, I was thinking, what makes me excited about a game? So I already mentioned nostalgia, right? I saw a few years ago, there was a Terminator RPG Kickstarter. And I was like, whoa, like I could be Arnold. Like finally I can kick ass. Like I was so pumped to be Arnold Schwarzenegger and be a Terminator. Or there was a Turtles game that was kickstarted and is still on its way. It's been kind of a long slog to get that actual physical copy out in the wild. But there's always some sort of nostalgia for me. There's something that I liked in pop culture that has now been turned into a game. And I recently did an episode, I think it was episode 31. I talked with Aaron Ermit from the Lore of the Rings podcast, and he had played D&D before, but he didn't know that there was the One Ring second edition.
Oh, it's so good too.
Tabletop game. Yeah, it's one of my 10 feet tall stacks that are underneath me.
Great game.
All the source copies from Free League Publishing. Just beautiful world building, amazing art.
Yep. And mechanically sound too, like mechanically built to tell not just a generic fantasy game, but mechanically built to tell a fellowship game.
Yeah. And that's such, the fellowship is what makes that such a great tabletop game, because you are a team of adventurers telling a collaborative storytelling game with one goal.
Yep.
Right? There's one goal that you're all at, and it's pretty cool. So it's nostalgia, but there's also other aspects that make something exciting for me as a GM, and it really goes inward for the kind of template that I like. What kind of games do I lean towards? I like games that are more narrative. I'm more of a storyteller.
So real quick on that, Clint, when you say more narrative, like we all toss this around, this term, what exactly does that mean for you? When you say a game A is more narrative than game B, what does that mean?
Yeah. So for me, a narrative game means that the narrative and the storytelling take precedence over the crunchiness of the rules. And crunchy is, we're going to get into crunchy. Yep. We're going to get into what crunchy means. To me, crunchy means that there are very specific mechanics that control the outcomes of what my character can and cannot do. There are some games that lend that, make it a little looser. Mm-hmm. I think I'm jumping around to different systems here, but I played the Star Wars tabletop game by Fantasy Flights.
Another favorite of mine, yeah.
I love that dice pool, right? Because the dice pool will allow you to fail, but in an interesting way.
No, the narrative dice system is amazing.
So that's, to me, a more narrative game focuses on mechanics that help you tell a good, well, I shouldn't even say, there can be great stories with tough mechanics, hard mechanics, unforgiving mechanics, but I like the ones that are more loose, where, I can still have fun and my character can still kick ass.
Would it be fair to say, Clint, that, and I'm gonna put a slightly different term out there, and you tell me if I'm hitting it right, it's a degree of simulationist. And it sounds to me like you like the abstract a little bit more versus, the full, simulation that can happen with quote unquote crunchier games, because both games are going to tell a story, right? A story is going to emerge from our play in a quote unquote crunchy game versus what is being called a narrative game. But I'm starting to realize that what I find is that I don't need to simulate the world. What I need is I need a certain feel and vibe from the game, and I want the mechanics to be there when I need them. I want them to get the hell out of the way when I don't need them, and that takes me out of figuring out how many minutes it takes before I drown, right?
Or travel, survival. Yep. How much food do you have? When I've played 5e, those were the mechanics that just got brushed over. And that's what I was introduced to. I was introduced to D&D 5e in 2015, freshly after the 5th edition, just had come out. And, I was introduced that was a beginner's game. Like if you were beginning the tabletop journey, and you were new, you started 5e. And what I've learned is that's not the case.
I disagree.
Oh, really? Oh, please tell me.
But because of a misconception, though. I think it's a phenomenal game for beginner players because you don't have to learn anything, because the play culture around 5e is that the GM is the person who learns all of the rules, who runs the entire game, who writes out a story and invites you to play a part in that story. So for a player, that's great. I don't need a player's manual. You just tell me when to grab a die and what number I need to hit. And so the asymmetrical load that's on the GM does make 5e great as a beginner player, but I feel like the players are missing out on so much in that scenario, because you can find something that has a similar load on the player, but the player gets to engage in the game, which I don't think necessarily happens at a lot of 5e tables.
That's a really good distinction, and that's probably why I feel like it wasn't a good beginner game, because I'm a forever GM, right?
Right. Oh, the load for you as a GM is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it was a lot. So, I took this to the Reddit community, right? I wanted to figure out.
As you do.
Yes, I love Reddit. I just love Reddit.
I know you do.
Reddit is a place where people hide behind their username, and they will be audacious. They will say some of the most aggressive, amazing things that you just can't get when somebody's identity is connected to it. So love it or hate it, we got some pretty good information. So about 8,000 people viewed and interacted with this question. And
that's incredible.
It was really awesome. And I just said, how do you choose a good fit game for your table? And mainly it was GMs that responded. Because anybody who's super excited or crazy in this hobby is usually a GM of some sort.
Yep.
It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's what I've experienced. And from the conversations that I have with these GMs, I boiled their advice down to 3 questions. I really love breaking it up into 3s. I don't know why, but I guess my brain just thinks that way. So the first was, what kind of story do you want to tell? And there were so many answers that came in, right? Fantasy, horror, sci-fi, superheroes, you name it. The second question was, do you prefer a story which leans more to the narrative or leans to the rules heavy crunch? And I appreciated how you said they're both tell a story.
Right.
But some stories require more world control, and that's where the rules come in.
And there's nothing wrong with those people, Clint, that want that simulationist, right?
Yeah.
That wants the grid, and I move 4 squares and my reach is, 2 feet, and my halberd is going to do different damage on a different table than my sword. That shit's awesome for the right people.
Can you give me an example of a game that's an amazing simulation? Like how you explained it, where everything just feels like you're living the world to the teeth.
Lancer, I think, is the best example of a just crunchy simulationist game. I have zero interest in playing Lancer. But man, if that is your thing, like Lancer's right there, because the role playing piece of it, where I inhabit a character and speak in a first person and make decisions in a first person, that occurs, but it's secondary to that tactical building your mech, fitting your mech, maintaining your mech, pulling out the minis and fighting a battle on there. And it's elegant at the same time. It's not clunky like I think some simulationist games can be. It's very elegant, but it is a simulationist game, which is funny because it's a mech game, right? But yeah, and again, even though I have no interest in playing Lancer, I've always put that very, very high on a pedestal for, like, if you want like to freaking play. And the thing for me, Clint, is part of the reason why I don't do this. Like, I can play mini war games to scratch that itch, because it's a wonderful itch, the tactics and the strategy and the beating of the game, right? Like, I get that in my mini games, so I don't look for it in my RPGs. But for some people, they look for it in RPGs for both.
Yeah, my buddy Jonathan Eisman, friend of the pod, he said that he's read through the Lancer book several times and still doesn't know how to play.
So my advice to him is he needs to just start running it.
Ah,
That's the only way you can learn Lancer. You can't read Lancer and take it all in.
and that's my suggestion for when people want to learn a game, run it.
Yep.
And that was one of the pieces of advice that came up time and time again. You want to learn it? Go run it and learn as you go. Now, there was a third question. We can go through all these questions again. I just wanted to lay them all out. The third question was, do you run a game set in a pre-made universe and world and setting, or do you want to run a game that's set in an open world where you are sort of the master of the universe? The world building. I think of the Year Zero engine. I don't know who I was listening to. It was probably the McElroys in the Adventure Zone way back when, and they were playing something where they were creating their world. It was like an undersea adventure, and that was the first several episodes, was them making up this world that they were then going to play in. So that was the 3 main questions. It was, what kind of story do you want to tell? Do you prefer a story that leans to the narrative or the crunchiness? And do you want a pre-made world or not?
Because I'm a pain, I want to reframe these.
Okay.
Because for me, I think they're bringing up different points than their headlines. What I'm hoping it'll do for some people listening is it'll challenge some of the common language we hear when we talk about our hobby. So let's talk real quickly about the first one. What kind of story do you want to tell? I challenge that you are not telling a story. You're playing a game. And because it's magical, the hobby, a story will emerge from that game. So I challenge GMs, don't think about what is the story I'm going to tell. That happens all by itself. You don't need to come up with a 3-act structure. Our brains construct the 3-act structure, whether we want to or not. I don't have to decide what is going to be the next thing that happens. What I need to do is I need to create a world and populate that world with NPCs, but I'll say people, with people that want things and are afraid of things. Lay that all out, then decide if no player character showed up, what would happen? Then grab your 4 agents of chaos, your 4 players, drop them in that world, and then see what happens and react. Don't think about then the villain is going to do this, and then they have to go to this building to find that clue. Get rid of all of that mentality. Don't try to tell a story. Create the world, lay out everything there, and then drop your agents of chaos in there and follow them and react to them. So I'm reframing that to say you need to find the right genre and the right feel, which I completely agree with. And again, do it for yourself, right? If you don't like horror, don't run a horror game. If superheroes get you so excited, that's enough to have 4 players that don't read comic books get excited. Even if they don't love superheroes, if you do, it'll work. So I think it's finding the right genre, and I don't know of a better feel, but like the right vibe. Like, what is this? What is it going to feel like to play this game? Which I don't think is talked about enough, quite frankly.
I was talking to Ken Haidt back in episode 18.
What does he know? What does he know?
He's a fun guy, man. It was so much fun.
Oh, great human, and he's forgotten more about role playing than I'll ever learn. So.
Wow, and the stuff that he's done with GURPS Horror, and what he continues to do with different renditions of that game, and the Gumshoes system. He was saying that when it comes to horror, because I typically don't like horror. I don't like watching horror movies. My mom loved them. I don't want to read a horror book. But he said horror is not so much about, that scared feeling. It's playing with your phobias, but not leaning into people's traumas.
I totally agree with that last part. That last part is big.
And that was beautiful, because that's, I think, my fear. Is I'm going to play a horror game and something traumatic to me is going to pop up.
And you have a better chance of it happening there, but it's not the only place it could happen, right? It could happen potentially in any genre.
Correct.
That's why safety tools are really important. You and I could talk for 3 hours about safety tools.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I find, so I'm not only a fan of horror games and running horror games, but I love horror books. I love horror TV shows. I like the movies too. That is my favorite genre of entertainment. I recently, I've been trying to, I was on a journey to try to figure out why. Why do I like horror so much? Because I am a normal human being who does not have heads in my freezer, right? I'm not a bat, that's not who I am, right?
I'm glad.
Why do I, this is good, right? Why do I like it so much? And I feel terrible because I cannot remember the name of the podcast. It's 2 women that have this phenomenal horror podcast. I'll look it up, Clint, so people can check in the show notes and see which one I'm talking about. But she nailed it. What she said in her book, and I'll send the book title as well. It's a great book. What she said is that horror gives you a safe place to feel danger. When you're watching a horror movie, when you're playing a horror role-playing game, when you're reading a horror book, you can pause it, you can turn it off, you can close the book, you can stop at any point in time, but it allows you to explore some dangerous things in the complete, total warm safety of not being there. And it can be very cathartic, and that's what it is for me. And I think for a lot of horror fans, it's very cathartic. If that's an experience you don't even want to go through in a safe place, then it's not for you.
Well, and that makes sense, right? It's sometimes bravery, right? Let's flip it on. Any emotion is really what makes tabletop so cool, is that you're living these things that maybe you don't live in your everyday life, or maybe you do and you just don't realize it.
Yep.
A lot of times we discover things about ourselves as we play.
It's very true. One of the few hobbies that does that.
Yeah. All right, let's rephrase question number 2.
So question 2 says, do you prefer a story which leans more to the narrative storytelling or rules heavy crunch? I think we've already kind of reframed that a little bit. Whereas I think that it's a matter of level of simulation and the amount of detail do you want the game to carry for you, or are you willing to abstract some things, right? And I think one of the perfect examples I talk about that I think shows abstract versus simulationist is I'm a thief and I want to sneak into the castle. Now in 5e, I'm going to keep making stealth checks. Stealth check for the first guard, for the second guard, for the fourth guard. I hear it jokingly called roll till you fail, right? Compare that to Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark says, one roll. Let's figure out how you did. Right. And then we'll go through guard 1 and guard 2 and guard 3 and play it out. And it'll be awesome because we know I succeeded, or I exceeded with complications or whatever it might be. But that's, I think, a good example of that array. Same thing with like for combat, right? You can have games where it's one roll that says you won the combat. Now tell me what happens. Or we can spend 3 sessions in 5e to roll and miss, roll and miss, roll and hit, take 4 damage, right? And I'm being a little flippant about it. For those who are listening that on your feed, Clint, I am not a fan of 5e, but I love that 5e exists, and I give no slight to people who love that system. It's just not for me, right? So yeah, I think the second one we've kind of covered.
Yeah, I was going to say, and there's this is going on a tangent, so probably not good podcast etiquette, but the flashback mechanic.
That's my entire podcast.
Yeah, the flashback mechanic, right? In Blades in the Dark. Oh. Can you talk a little bit about how that? Because that is something where you roll once, you fail, but then it's such a cool storytelling element.
I do this a good bit. So 2 games that are built for heists, Shadowrun and Blades in the Dark. I have run both. I'm old enough to have run Shadowrun.
What version of Shadowrun?
Like old man Shadowrun.
Okay.
But like terrible mechanic Shadowrun.
Okay.
The 2 games are very different handling a heist. With Shadowrun, it's a more traditional situation, which is we're going to pull out a map, the players as their characters, and usually mostly just the players as the players are going to come up with a plan. Here's our plan. Here's our plan B. Here's our plan C. What if this happens? You got to make sure you pack explosives. I'm going to make sure I have these spells ready. Well, what if this happens? Oh God, we got to go plan D now, right? And it can go 2 or 3 sessions in Shadowrun where you are planning the heist. For some tables, that's amazing, right? That process is why they play the game. In Blades in the Dark goes, what's your target? What are you trying to do? Okay, let's start. And you're like, well, I haven't planned anything. You, the player, have not planned anything. You are correct. But you are not a good thief. Turns out your character is, and your character has done all of the planning. So let's figure out how well their planning is. So you drop the player and their character into the situation the heist has started. The character has planned this out. They are a master heist actor, right? And what'll happen is I walk up and I say, "Hey, Clint, there's 2 guards that are guarding the vault." And you go, "Phew, it's a good thing that 2 days ago I figured out who the 2 guards were going to be on this shift. And I got one of them drunk and got a copy of the key, or I found out he was sleeping with somebody else, so I blackmailed him. So he's going to let us through." It's like, oh, that's interesting. Let's flash back to that moment. Let's see if it was successful or not, and let's bring us back to the present. So what's cool about it is you get to play as a master at pulling off these heists, even though Craig, the 9 to 5, 40-hour week guy, and knows nothing about breaking into a castle or a bank or anything. But I'm playing, Alfred, who's been doing this his whole life. So yeah, I think that's a good example of that.
I would say that Blades in the Dark has a pre-made world, right?
Yes.
Like you're in is it Duskfall? Duskfall.
Yep.
You're in Duskfall. There's a story kind of like why you're trapped in this city for your own protection. You can't run away. It's like a pressure cooker for conflict. Yet there are other games. I think of the solo. It's not just solo RPG, but I think of Starforged or Iron Sworn by Sean Tompkin. Super cool dude. Really great game.
Great games.
That is open world. I mean, there is a map, but
Right.
you don't have to stay on that map.
Yep.
And you can make whatever you want. So the third question that we were maybe going to rephrase, going to adjust, discombobble, and put it back together. You know, I'm from Milwaukee. If you go to the Milwaukee airport, there's a recombobulation area after you get through security. So any Milwaukee people, you got to go find the discombobulation
If you
area.
stripped everything, you've been laid bare in front of TSA, you can put your life back together again.
The recombobulation area after you've been discombobulated.
That's amazing.
So we're going to discombobulate this. Third question, do you want to run a game set in a pre-made universe and setting, or do you want an open world? That was a question people wanted you to ask. What do you think about that?
I don't think it matters. So this is the one where I will disagree with 8,000 people on that. I don't think this matters. And the reason is tied to what I talked about at the very beginning with story. I'm running a module next month of Mothership called VR Dead. It is a zine. It has got everything I need to run it. How I run that is no different than if I had created my own zine to run, if I was doing a home brew, as people call it. And the reason it's not different is the only thing that's different is, do I have a pre-made a setting and NPCs and what's these NPCs want already printed for me? Or do I need to decide what that is? But after that, it's all the same. The way that I like to look at and think about games. So, but this is, this is not all about me, right? So for some people, this is a critical question, right? Because what's really being said here is, how much work do you want to put into this before you start playing? And I will, again, challenge. Well, I don't want to challenge people, because there are GMs out there, Clint, that is their kink, is creating their own world and their own, like, the politics and the geography. And, you know, this is why this was like, they're creating their own fantasy novels, and that's what they love to do. And God bless you, freaking go. That is a beautiful way to enjoy this hobby. That's just not me.
Yeah.
So I don't want to make it sound like a bad mouth. So I take what I said back. For some people, this question is very, very important. For me, and I want to challenge people that are listening to think about, maybe it isn't that important, and maybe the actions as a GM are the same. But the bigger question I think it's hinting at is, how much load do you want as a GM? How much do I need to be prepping for 30 minutes before every session, or do I need to be prepping 3 days before every session? One is not better than the other. It all depends on what you're looking for. So that is a decision point.
I'm going to bring it back to something you said when you were talking about your process when you're looking for a game. So you read, and then you give yourself time to sit and think about it. And that may be months, that may be weeks.
Yep.
Reading has never been something that I do fast. Reading for Clint is a process. And what I've found for myself is I sometimes enjoy making my own world, because I don't have to read and try to soak in somebody else's world. Same thing about campaigns, right? There are certain pre-made campaigns. D&D is full of them. And I know you can go on tabletop and drive-through RPG, and you can get all sorts of really cool campaigns and really cool adventures that people have written.
Well, I think what you're talking about is the fact that you may not necessarily enjoy or share my enjoyment of reading games as much as I do, right? So for you, the play part of the hobby is paramount, is what it sounded like to me.
Yeah.
But again, so I'm dyslexic. I'm an extremely slow reader. I get angry, like viscerally angry at my wife, because she's one of those people that can read a novel in 2 days. And it takes me a long time to read. So I share that with you, but I also enjoy it, which sounds like you may not enjoy it, and that's nothing wrong with that. But here's the thing that I want to challenge you again on is, go pick up Frostmaiden, right? This huge hardback 5e campaign, and just read the first chapter or two to do what I was just saying, which is, what is this world? What is the setting? Who is in play here? Who are the NPCs in play here? And then I don't care what chapter 7 says in Frostmaiden, because we may never get there, because I have no idea when I drop my Agents of Chaos in there what's going to happen. But yeah, and again, for some people, and it sounds like for you, Clint, the juice is exercising the creativity of, I want to create my own scenario, my own settings, my own NPCs, my own, layout for my players to jump in and to tear to pieces and ignore 90% of what I made. Like, that is a phenomenal part of this hobby.
I think I remember where I was going with this as you were talking. So the prep. So it takes longer for me to read something I didn't create to prep for it than it does for me to make it and then be able to run it. I enjoy the reading. I mean, if my wife was like, what did you read in the last year? Most of the books I read were probably tabletop RPG.
Good for you.
Books that I would never actually get to play, right? Because that's the unspoken, dirty other hobby that we have. Games we'll never get to run. Mike Shea, Lazy Dungeon Master, Sly Flourish.
Yep.
I really love the Lazy Dungeon Master method of creating an adventure, creating a campaign, even making a session. That revolutionized the way that I set up a game. Because like you said, what are the NPCs? Who are the main players? What are the secrets and clues? And if your Agents of Chaos don't make it real, it doesn't have to be.
Exactly.
And that's what helped with the prep. You mentioned I may never get to chapter 7.
Right.
But I have a starting point, a strong start, I think is what Mike calls it.
Yeah, I think Lazy Dungeon Master is a required reading for every GM. I think also John For's 5-Room Dungeon is another one that I think even if you don't use Shea's method, even if you don't use a 5-room dungeon as a method, it'll reframe how you think about it. It'll change how you think about it. And this is me being my typical shill. I think the third thing that is a required reading, even if you never run the game, or two of them, there's 2 games you need to own and you need to read because it'll make you better at every other game you run. The first one is Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark will blow your mind and change how you think about the hobby. You don't have to ever run Blades in the Dark for it to blow your mind. Turns out it's also a great freaking game. The other one is the Warden's Manual for Mothership. What Sean McCoy put together in this little a zine size is, I think, one of the best GM advice per page that I've ever come across. So if you never run Mothership, you still should buy and just go get the PDF. You can buy just that PDF, the Warden's PDF on drive-through. It's going to cost you a couple bucks. It's phenomenal. And then reading the GM section of Blades in the Dark will also make you better at running games.
Burning Wheel.
It's a lot of game.
Really intense. Everybody says it's super intense, but everybody will say, I don't know how I could ever run this, but it's so well made and written. What are your thoughts about that? I've never read through it. That's rumor. So
I've read Burning Wheel, and I've never run it, and I'll be honest, I never will. It's a game that changed how games were thought of. So it is definitely a landmark game. There was nothing like it before, and there was a lot of like it afterwards, but not as a complete thing. They just designers were like, oh wow, like this changes things. Similar to like an Apocalypse World kind of changed how everybody thought about how games could be run and played. It's a lot of game. But no, I think that if you've never read Burning Wheel, I think it's an important book. I think it's worth reading. It's worth owning. I don't put it up there as high as the ones that I'd mentioned. You also could read Mike Shea's complete works. You could read 5-Room Dungeon. You could read Blades in the Dark, and you could read the Mothership Warden's Guide 20 times before you finish Burning Wheel.
A lot of game, a lot of book.
Yeah. But again, here's my commentary about Burning Wheel. You'll never hear someone go, what do you think about Burning Wheel? And they'll go, it's fine. Like, no. Either you love Burning Wheel, or you're kind of like me. We're like, yeah, I mean, it's good. It's a good book. Or there's people that just hate it, but you never have the milquetoast opinion about Burning Wheel.
No. Yeah. It's extreme. There's nothing in the middle, not lukewarm.
Yeah. But the people who love it, oh God, do they love it.
All right. Going to move part 2, the good fit for the players. And my question to you is, you run a lot of games for a lot of players, and not all games resonate with every player. How do you balance player preference with your excitement?
So excitement's first.
Yes.
Excitement is first. We've established that. After that, it really kind of depends on the play field here. Right. So, and we're going to get into this when we say in person versus online, but I'm lucky because I have both, right? I have a regular locals game. It is the same 5 or 6 players and they rotate in. We rotate GMs as well. So I am often the player, not just the GM, even though it's all hosted here. And we're all very different. All of us like different things. And, there's a certain social contract that has to be in place if you have a constrained pool at your table, which is we are going to find the game and that's all we're going to play. And it's going to scratch all the right itches for everybody. Or kind of like what I have here is we're going to experiment, right? Jim is going to run this game. And you know what? I bet Jesse's going to love it and Craig's going to hate it. But then we're going to get James to run a game and Craig's going to love it and Jesse's not going to like it. But both Craig and Jesse are looking for games that will challenge us. And, so we're up for this laboratory. We're up for this experiment. Otherwise, you do need to consider that, right? But the matrix is very similar that you're going to judge this off of, right? Where do your players individually fall on that simulationist versus abstract genre? You don't want to run Call of Cthulhu if you've got 3 of your 4 players hate horror. So you definitely have to consider that. But Clint, it's in my opinion, so secondary to the first one. But it doesn't veto it either, right? If someone said to me, hey, Craig, could you run this game for this table? And I knew all of them have 0 interest in horror. They hate horror. It doesn't matter how much I love horror. It's not going to land. So I might go to my second favorite, right? But I can't go to some place where I don't have passion. Right. So if they said to me, hey, Craig, would you go run 5e for this group? I'd be saying, the answer is no, because I am not going to love it enough to make it a good experience for everybody. But in its own way, I guess what I'm saying, Clint, is I think that the decision matrix is the same for the GM, but I do believe it's secondary. And you also have to understand, why are people coming to the table? Right. So my local group, like I said, it's a bit of a laboratory. We want to try a lot of different games. We want to play different genres. We want to try different mechanics. What we really want is we want people who don't normally run games to run games, people that do normally run games to get a chance to play. And for people like me who are often the GM, for us to, bring a passion project to the table. That's why we get together to play games. For each table, it's different. So you definitely need to have the conversation of, why are we meeting every other Thursday?
Is that from experience where you've been at a table or been in a group where there was not a social contract? Or did you just know going in, this is how I want to come to this hobby?
I think the contrast for that, Clint, the answer is no. But that's because my local games for the past 20 some odd years that I've been playing are curated. But the comparison I'll give is the difference between my home game here and playing at a convention. When you play at a convention, whoever signs up, and you don't know what that GM is unless you know they're, know them by name. You don't know what you're going to get into. That's where I think the social contract for most local games is built in, unless it's not discussed at all. And even if you've been playing with the same group for 30 years now, I challenge you to go, why are we doing this? Steve, why do you like to do this? Betty, why do you like to do this? Why do you make sure that every first Saturday we're here playing? You might be surprised what people tell you. It's the same reason, I'm a huge fan of Safety Tools and Session Zero, even with people you've played with, for most of your adult life. At a convention, the GM has a different conversation to start off with, and I think you have to be explicit about that social contract because you're playing with strangers. And it's also very different for me from an online perspective because of, there's a lot of people on my Patreon that get to play at my table who I've never met in person. And so there is a certain social contract conversation that has to happen.
It made me think of a conversation I had with Robin D. Laws, and he was talking about his book, the Laws of Good Game Mastering.
Yep. Great book.
Figuring out how everybody likes to play, right? Yep. I've learned that I like to butt kick. I like to get in. I am always the tank. I love to go in and start swinging. I will pull the gun first. I'm the Han Solo.
Yep.
But there are other people who love to strategize, and they want the strategy. And if you don't have that, they're not going to have fun. And so that's part of the social contract too. Like you said, asking them, figuring out why they're there, that is so important.
Yeah, understand the alchemy, right? Understand the alchemy. And part of that social contract is too, Clint, is that sometimes when you want to pull your blaster out, you know that I think Betty kind of wants to do some planning here. So you know what? I won't grab my blaster this time. That's part of that social contract.
Sharing the spotlight.
Yeah. And in the same way too, that when the GM puts a clue in front of you or puts a lead in front of you, you need to figure out why your character is going to follow that lead. Because part of that social contract is that I am here to engage in the game. So, don't be that girl or that guy that says, "Oh, that's not what my character would do." Like, that's not why we're here. So stop it.
I'm also a method actor, according to Robin's terminology.
Yeah.
So I'm the guy that's like, my character would do this. And I've learned the hard way. Some people don't have fun with that. I can ruin fun.
Yeah. And I think that it can be fun because the activity you're going through there is trying to inhabit a character. What I talk to about with a lot of other people is don't come in there inhabiting a fully fleshed out human or dragon, whatever the hell you're playing, right? A fully fleshed out character. Sketch out your character, let them be their own thing, and then hop in and discover your character through play. I think that you throw away your 3-4 page backstories, just put a sketch together. And then I think our method players might realize that there's an incredible amount of joy of discovering who Gargar the Barbarian really is. And the only way to figure out who Gargar is to have Gargar in the world, facing adversity, and most importantly, making choices. And if you jump in as a method player into a stranger's body, and allow that stranger to react in real time, not because of the page 4 of my backstory, you're going to find an incredible amount of joy as a method player.
That's interesting. I remember I was asked to play the Starfinder play test this last fall. Very cool. It was a lot of fun. And I went in, my character, the butt kicking lizard dude, the strong, beefy guy. And there was a moment where this cat-like character, I can't remember the name of all the races, but he reached out to me and we formed a bond. There was something where I saved him and I started calling him my little dancing buddy because he did something where he was dancing. And if I had gone with my backstory, we would have never had that really beautiful moment or that fun inside joke, that you just can't get if you just follow the script. On paper, everything looks like it should have worked. The game is a good fit for me as a GM. It seemed like it was going to be a good fit for the players. You start playing, and then it feels like you might want to abandon the game. What are the signs for that for you? And maybe you've never experienced this, but what would be the signs for somebody?
No, I have. We have pulled the plug many a time. It's never happened on the channel because my process to bring something to the channel to play live is different than bringing it to the table. I talked about here local. It's very much an experiment. And we have pulled the plug on many a game here. I don't know, Clint, if I have got specific signs, but everybody knows. Everybody knows. And it's why I think it's important to have some sort of structured post-game discussion in every single session. The way I tend to structure is a thing called Thoughts, Stars, and Wishes, which I stole from Jason Cordova's The Gauntlet. Thoughts, Stars, and Wishes. I added thoughts. I think his is just Stars and Wishes. I have Thoughts, Stars, and Wishes. You can see it on my channel all the time. And that is a way to kind of gauge where is everybody. Here's what you shouldn't do. Don't end every session go, did everybody have fun? That gives you no information whatsoever, right? Unless you're, most people are going to be polite or they're not going to say anything. They're not going to express their thoughts. What I like about Thoughts, Stars, and Wishes, thoughts is tell me about your thoughts about the game, the mechanics, the setting, like the game outside of how we're engaging with the game. What are your thoughts about the game? And what you'll hear people go is, I like this about this game. I struggle here, right? So they're not sharing their opinion about the session they just played with their friends and you put so much time and effort into. So it's safe for them to go, man, I'm really struggling with those grappling rules. Unbelievable information for you to be able to gauge where the table is. Stars. Stars is the opposite of saying, what didn't you like? Stars tells you two things. And what stars is when did this shine? And a star can be a moment. It can be a player. It can be something about the system. But when players tell you they're stars, they're telling you what they want more of, which as a GM is gold, right? So if I say my star was when after we fought the big bad and we're sitting around, I had a moment with Genevieve, and Genevieve's, the way that her and I interacted, and when she said this, like it was just awesome. I mean, that tells you that player is telling you what they love about this hobby, and you need to listen to that as a GM. And then wishes is, what are you not getting that you want, or what are you getting that you want more of? So everything is still the positive, right? Nothing negative here. And what you'll find, or what I have found, Clint, I can't speak for you. What I have found is through this process, you can gauge where everybody is. If they're rattling off their thoughts, stars, and wishes, like, oh God, like I have 5 stars, right? And I'm like, oh, I want so much, then you know that this is working. We're cooking with gas. Like this is fantastic. If people start going, I don't really have any thoughts, and my star is when we killed the guy, and I wish that we could figure out the answer to the mystery. If you get 4 of those happening as you go through thoughts, stars, and wishes, you might be playing the wrong game, and you might need to pull the plug. Or as the GM, if you don't give a damn what the 4 of them are going to say, then you probably are running the wrong game. But man, when you do thoughts, stars, and wishes at the end of the session, and people are like, oh, and then there was this, and then there was that. Now, God, I'm really hoping to find out. Like, I know that that Voldemort is looking for this, and I want to understand why he. Like, dude, that's the game. You're good.
Yeah.
And the last little piece I'll put on there, Clint, is don't be afraid to pull the plug, because the only thing worse than not playing is playing a bad game. So and be honest with them. And because a lot of times what's happening is that they're waiting for someone to say it. So whether you're a player or a GM, you be the one to say it, going, maybe we should play Starforged next week. Who wants to run Starforged?
That was a selfish question. I'll just say that was a selfish question.
Are you in a bad game, Clint?
Help me. No, you know what it is that I've been the guy like, hey, did you guys have fun? And you're right. The responses are polite. It's not good. This is completely not a tabletop book, but it's a book called The Mom Test.
Don't know that.
It's an entrepreneurial book. It's about, asking questions to clients so that you get real information. Because if you ask your mom, hey, Mom, I'm going to create this podcast about tabletop RPGs. What do you think about, oh, honey, that just looks so great. Mm-hmm. You'll be great at it. You're my big boy. And then, what did I really get from that? But there are better questions that we can be asking. So I won't go through all the questions in that book, but that's what I'm hearing from you.
Similar idea.
Ask good questions at the end when you're doing that de-escalation period. And then you get information that can either fuel the game to continue or, pull the plug.
And I'll really highlight the wishes part of that, because that is pure kindling for you as a GM, because they're telling you, I liked this and I want more of this, or this hasn't happened and I would like that. You take those and you plan session 4. Like, oh, okay. We need more of this. This hasn't happened. I need to introduce this. And nobody mentioned that, so I can probably throw that in the back burner. Maybe nobody's really wishing for that. Like, it just fuels what your next session will look like.
And as a lazy dungeon master methodologist, I would just, I know exactly my NPCs. I know my secret and clues. Yep. And then they get to make it happen.
You try it, Clint. Thoughts, stars, and wishes.
All right, let's dive into person versus online. What unique challenges do you face, Craig, when you're not in person? Like you're online with people. What challenges would anybody playing online have to run into?
I think the biggest distinction, what you lose online, there's a lot you gain online. I'll talk about that in a second, but you lose a lot. Body language. We're all in a box. We're Hollywood squares. I just showed my age. And you lose body language. which can be very informative for you as a GM. There's more stealthy distractions available in online play. It's easy for me in person to see if someone's on their phone, which is not me saying to that player, like, no, you don't do that. What that's telling me is I am not engaging them in the way they need to be engaged. That's a me problem. That's not a Steve on his phone problem, right? And that could be the wrong system. That could be a lot of reasons, but I need to talk to Steve about it a little bit versus punishing Steve for being that. Whereas when you're playing online, I could, I've got 4 monitors in my setup. I could have like 3 different, Amazon and Drive-Thru RPG, and you would never know in online play. As a result, like style-wise, I'm a little bit different in online play. In online play, you need to move that spotlight a lot more. You need to really proactively engage and keep them going. And I think in online play, thoughts, stars, and wishes are even more important because you're not getting the information you can in an in-person game. Now, that makes it sound like I prefer in-person to online. And if I had to pick one or the other, I would pick in-person. But here's what I would be giving up. The beauty of online is it is a big world and a big hobby. And one of the things that I love about my channel, Clint, is I have played with over 50 I've run games for over 50 different people that I never would have met, never would have engaged with. And my growth as a GM has come from having so many different people to engage with. And I have played in games that were run by people that I would not be able to play with because they live in Australia. And the beauty of online play is that you've got so much available to you out there. So I think if you don't play online, you should try it. It's not for everybody, but I think what I love the most about it is that, man, you get to explore different players, different GMs, different styles, different games. Whereas things can be a little bit more constrained, with in-person play.
And I can't remember the specific episode where I talk about this, but there are many ways to find games. Looking for a game, LFG, it's in every Discord channel. It's on Reddit. It's on many different circles on Facebook. Go to any social media group that involves tabletop gaming. You can find a game.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to pay for a game. Try it once or twice. And if you hate it, then never do it again. But get rid of that stigma that's out there. There's a lot to be said for paying for a game. It commits you and it commits the people that are at the table with you.
Yeah, it's validation for interest when somebody puts their money.
Great way to put it, Clint.
Yeah,
great
validation.
Way to put it. I'm going to steal that.
It's some people think it's like you're not as genuine or something if you're charging, and it's not the case at all.
No, just the opposite. I literally have skin in the game because I paid for this.
Yeah, I dropped money, and sometimes it's no more than $10.
It seems like a lot, Clint, because normally we don't do it, right? But like, if I were to tell you you're going to pay $10 for a coffee, you'd be like, oh, okay, because I pay $6 now.
It better be a good
right,
coffee.
But I pay $6 now when I go to Starbucks, right? But if you're used to playing nothing to play an RPG and then you hear $10, you're like, oh my God. But it's for many people, it's nothing. So I definitely encourage you, if you've never paid for a game, you should.
Yeah, that's actually how my cousin, Andy, he was actually on the pod. I don't think I said he was my cousin on the episode, but now everybody knows. Cat's out of the bag.
Insiders.
Yeah, those Shires. He actually got into the hobby because he was going through his master's program, and a bunch of people from the master's program decided to get together and pay a GM.
That's so cool.
To play the game. And he's like, this is wonderful. And now he wants to do it himself. So it's contagious.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's
a great story. I was thinking of unique challenges with in-person, and I've found that it's harder to get people together.
Yes.
Unless you have that 30-year group that just does that as a part of their normal time.
It's a bigger commitment, right? It's actually something I should have brought up, and I don't know if I've ever even thought about it, but there's 2 levels of commitment here, which is Clint reaches out to me and says, hey, Craig, can I steal an hour and a half from you on a Tuesday night and let's record a podcast together? Yeah, dude, I got you. Let's do this, right? Versus, hey, Craig, can you drive over to my house and let's get it all set up and let's record this podcast together. I'm telling you right now, Clinton, if you and I were in the same room, this podcast would be a little bit better. than it is right now, right? Because we would, again, for the same reasons, body language, so on and so forth. But it probably wouldn't have happened, right? It's much easier for me to go, yeah, I can be downstairs doing the dishes until 5 minutes of, I come up and I spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with Clint. That's not that commitment. If it's going to be going to Clint's, that suddenly becomes the whole day, the whole evening now is devoted, to that. So that's a really good point. Is the balance is a little bit easier in online play. I don't think I fully have thought about that before.
My dream would be to have an in-person, once-a-week game, long-term campaign in a game that I love with friends that I love, right? Utopia.
Yep.
Haven't found that yet.
Yeah, and there's so many factors. And the biggest factor is luck as far as that's concerned. It's a call to get more comfortable with online play.
The last bit here, discovering new elements or flavor, adding things into a game that you already love playing, but experimenting. Your group does a lot of experimenting, which is really fun to hear. There are some groups that would be like, what are you doing? Why are we doing this? And you have to be open to it, or that social contract has to at least say, we are open to doing these things. When you choose a new game, you look for something unique to highlight.
So let's put this in two different aspects, Clint, because how I pick a game for my locals is different than how I pick a game for the channel. There's different decision-making for that. I think more people will relate to how I pick for the locals, but just very briefly for online, there's a lot of factors that I consider, stuff that we've talked about. Do I love it? Am I going to be passionate about it? Can I sell this game? Because of my situation, I get to pick players. I don't have to find the game for a table, right, with online play. With my locals, it has to be a little bit more of a curated type thing. So I'm looking for different types of things. With online, I'm looking for underrepresented games. What this world does not need is another 5e AP. We don't need another Dungeons and Dragons actual play. We're good. There's so many good games out there, Clint. And I try to bring games to the channel that I think deserve more time and more visibility. So that's a big factor. I've now got a sense for my hundreds of patrons that I have a sense of kind of, we're a bit of a curated community, right? Because talk about paid GMing, they're paying to be a part of my community, right? So they're through the podcast or through the online play, that's a little bit self-selecting, right? So I kind of get what my group of potential players are going to get into, and that's part of my decision making. Though I do bring games that I know will challenge that group and will make them, go, oh boy, I don't think I'd ever would do that. But I think maybe you would, and let's try it, right? For the locals, I try to first find the game that I'm going to be passionate about. We've already covered that. But I also will pick games based off of my table, right? And again, I know Betsy loves this in games. I know that Jesse loves that in games. So I look for that Goldilocks. But I also, will find games that challenge that. I feel like I'm a broken record, Clint. It comes down to, what am I excited to run? That is the primary in both scenarios.
Repetition is the master teacher. It is okay to say something more than once. It's very good. So excitement first for you. Passion is contagious. It overflows. There's one aspect of the visual and audio presentation of a game, right? If I'm physically at a table, there's maybe a map. Maybe there's not. Maybe we're doing theater of the mind. When you're playing online, do you try to use more of your voice and more of your talking and more of your, speaking to engage? Or do you use a virtual map? Do you use video with audio, right? Music? What are your suggestions to GMs? This is the real question. What are your suggestions to GMs to help engage their players online when they don't have them physically in front of them?
So how I run a game isn't much different than in person or online. My style of my GMing style is the same. I think the only thing style-wise that's a little bit different is I teach as I run more online than I do in person, and I'll be repetitive, right? So if you watch my APs, you'll see me explain a mechanic as it's engaged in the game, even though I know all four of my players know this, right? I'm not doing this just for the four of them. In person, I wouldn't go over those rules again because I know all four of them already know it. So I think whether you sat at my table, Clint, or played with me online, I don't think you would see two different Craigs in that scenario. Craig does voices at his house, but he doesn't do voices online. None of that. Style-wise, it's very much identical. The difference is that when me and the locals are up here, nobody's watching us. We want to screw around and talk about the latest Star Wars TV series on Disney Plus for 45 minutes. Let's just do it because that's why we're here, right, as a community, and to do that. Nobody's going to watch that, right? Whereas when I play online, it is for an audience. Now, I'm a firm believer that if I make it a fun game that my players love, the audience will find it. So at no point do I ever design anything for the audience. It's always for my table. But I do things that are different for the audience. Some basic things, audio quality, making sure everybody has a good mic, make sure everybody, has got a decent camera, making sure that we have a pace that we're keeping and we're staying focused as we play. That's far more part of my online than in my in-person. Production value is important to me online because I want to look like a big channel. I want to look like a much bigger channel than I really am, because I'm a firm believer that that's how you become a big channel and how you gather an audience. I don't know how many actual play podcasts you've listened to, Clint, but man, in the first 30 seconds, if your audio is garbage, I don't care what you're playing and how great it's going to be, but we're done. We're done. But if it sounds professional, if it sounds like you have hundreds of thousands of listeners a month, even if you only have 7, then that's how you get to 100,000 listens a month, right? Is by sounding that way. The one thing that ties this together, though, and this is something that I did not know until I became an online streaming GM or whatever the hell I am, is everybody, and I mean everybody, needs to record their sessions, even if you are not showing it to anybody. Because that will make you level up as a GM in a way that you will not even comprehend if you're not doing it. I started doing this online and then very quickly realized, I can go back and watch. And what you will learn as a GM going back and watching or listening, if you just record the audio, is so much. Like what is working? What isn't working? Where are they getting excited? Jim just randomly mentioned something that, honestly, because I'm spinning plates up here behind the GM screen, I didn't even pick up on it. But now that I'm passively listening, I am picking up on it. You will find yourself just improving so much, and just and even for prep. God, where did we leave off? Well, I can go grab the recording and watch the last 30 minutes of it and know immediately where we left off. So I think the one thing that I will tie the two of them together is, if you're not recording your sessions, I highly recommend that you do. It's very valuable.
That's not just in gaming. I was listening to Chris Voss, who was an FBI negotiator. He was talking to Jordan Harbinger on the Jordan Harbinger show, and he was saying that oftentimes they will have wingmen when they're in a negotiation, because the wingmen can look and see what's happening beyond what the negotiator's saying. And then when they break up with their session and they're like, okay, we need to talk to our people, the wingmen will say things, and I don't remember him saying that.
Yep.
And Chris Voss will be like, it's a good thing I have these other people. So it's almost like you're creating wingmen for yourself by recording. You are your wingman, just in the future watching yourself playing in the past.
No question. If you have a group of locals and you're playing a long-term campaign with those locals, imagine the value of recording it and then distributing that recording to them. Some of your players won't engage with it. Some of them, it's going to be critical, right? I know I got to go to Clint's on Saturday morning. It's been a month because the last one, our other one got canceled. I'm just on the way there. I'm going to listen as I'm driving to Clint's. And then when I get there, I'm go. It's like we played yesterday.
That's awesome. That's a really good thought. And, for people who are in person, there are some limitations, right? I guess you could record on your phone, I suppose.
Literally Clint, the phones are amazing. The mics on phones compared to the stuff that we had before. Take your phone, put it in the middle of the table.
Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned, and I apologize because I think I forgot about it, but I just remembered, things like, sound, music, ambiance and stuff. I have not answered that question. So lately I've been playing around with having music and sound effects on the channel. I don't know if I like it yet or not. I've abandoned it at my locals game. I find it to be more distracting than immersive. Handouts I struggle with. I will do more handouts in person than I will online. I find them distracting online. I don't do battle maps, but that's just me.
Yeah.
I think in some way, if you're playing what we were talking about, the abstract versus the tactical simulationist, online play is better, to the point where even if you're playing in person, having a flat screen TV laying on the table and having people play on that can make things considerably easier. Having a VTT that handles some of that heavy load in the mechanics of, all right, his armor class is this, and I've got that, and I've got a, biting weapon, and if I damage him, he gets bleed. Like, having a VTT that carries all of that, that's phenomenal. And you can use that even at home games. But yeah, as far as like sound effects, lighting, mood stuff, I personally think I'm going to end up not doing it, even though I'm experimenting with it right now.
Music can be tough because when you have it too loud, or you could have it great on your end, but then it starts blasting through the other person's computer, and then you're spending time trying to do the tech, and then now you've lost the immersion.
Completely.
That's a bummer.
That's a good ad for Sirenscape. One thing I love about Sirenscape is that each of your players control their own volume, or they can just not engage it at all, versus piping it through the live feed of your voice. So for those of you that are playing with it, Sirenscape, I think, is free. What's one big thing that's nice about Sirenscape is that players can engage with it or not engage with it. It's completely up to them. And if they do engage with it, they can have it loud or soft, and it has nothing to do with how you're broadcasting it.
I'm going to ask the question I always ask people. And I like this question because there's something about the economy of words. So only giving somebody a certain amount of words to speak, you have to choose your words wisely. I want you to give me a 10-word phrase that is a takeaway for all of our listeners. The listener listening right now, the person who's going to be sitting at the table, like when it comes to choosing a good fit game for their table, what is a 10-word phrase that they can remember to help them, whether they're a GM? I think maybe the GM, let's focus on the GM, the person who's running the game.
So I feel like I have to write a haiku when you say, I'm sitting here going, what? So I know what you're saying with 10 words, though, is keep it short, which is, if I have to boil it down, Clint, the headline for what we've been talking about is find something that excites you enough that'll excite the table. I think we went into a lot of details and the things beyond that, but I think that's the headline, which is find something that you're excited about enough to excite everybody else at the table.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks for meeting with me. Where can people find you?
Yeah.
Where can they get more tabletop talk?
My main two avenues is I have a podcast called Tabletop Talk. The focus of Tabletop Talk is me interviewing creators, from people who make scenarios to people who make games. I've had some of the largest names in tabletop gaming on my channel. I've had a lot of people you've never heard of. It's a nice mixture of the two. But if you want to understand how those books on your shelf got made, from the very beginning idea to kickstarting them to publishing them out. It's a podcast about the creative process, but it's focused on tabletop creators. So that's Tabletop Talk. It's everywhere. Yeah. Any podcatcher has it. The other avenue, if you want to see me run games or hand-picked guest GMs that kind of embody what we've been talking about today, Third Floor Wars on YouTube or Twitch. I've got hundreds of APs that you can peel through. More than half are horror. Just big shocker. Yeah, so YouTube, Twitch, and your podcatcher are the best places to catch me. Third Floor Wars, and then the podcast is called Tabletop Talk.
Yeah, it's phenomenal for those of you guys who have not listened to Craig, not listened to the people that he interviews. And it's right, like there's big names, people you never heard of, but regardless, there's value in, one, stirring up passion for my hobby loving of tabletop. Like you guys were talking about Conan the Barbarian, the new game that was coming out. And I'm like, I didn't even know there was a Conan game coming out. How cool is that?
I've been told that I'm the most expensive free podcast you'll listen to, because you listen to these people that are making these games, Clint, and their passion that's behind it. You're like, I need to buy this game. Like, I never thought I'd be buying another Conan game, but after hearing about the process that they went through to make this and the passion behind it, like I've I've got to own this game. But I'm going to put you on the spot, Clint, because though there's people on your feed that just heard me talk about my stuff, but there's people on my feed that may not know about you. So we found each other mutually because we're mutual fans of each other's podcasts. And one thing that I think is fun is that we have two very different podcasts, but I love that we both admire the work of each other. So Clint, for my listeners on my feed, where do they need to go?
Yeah, so I run the Claim to Game podcast. We're pretty fresh, pretty new. It started in 2024. You can find me on any podcast listening application or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find me at claimtogamepodcast.com. We have a Discord community. It's pretty tiny, pretty small at the current state, but that's a place where you can learn how to tell good stories. That's what I am most passionate about, getting people together to tell amazing stories. And that's what this hobby does. On my podcast, I bring people that are creators, but also people who can give advice about how to be a better GM. Not even better. It's not a bad and a good, like how to hone your craft to have more fun. And if you're
how to level up.
Yeah, how to level up, how to level up, how to also engage your players. And if you're a player considering to be a GM and you're like, oh man, I got imposter syndrome, I don't think I can do this. You can totally do this, and you're going to bring your own flavor and your own passion to it. So highly encourage you to check me out. And also, if you're on social, I am on one social platform, and that is Threads. So if you want to find me on threads.net/@ClintShire, that's another place you can find me.
I got to get you over to Blue Sky, Clint. So for my feed, your listeners already know this or may not have heard it phrased this way, but my listeners that have not heard of you need to know this one. There's several things that I love about Clint's podcast. One is, unlike my podcast, it's very bite-sized. Clint is very methodical about boiling things down. It's very focused, and it's easy to consume. And that is a huge thing, Clint, that you came out of the gate for. 2, you sound like you have 100,000 listeners a month. And I think that is a big deal. Your sound quality, the amount of time and effort you put into planning of your podcast, the quality of your podcast is phenomenal. The last thing I'll say is that I find Clint's podcast very actionable. Clint obviously, as you probably have picked up on, has a background in consuming a lot of, what is that kind of media called? Not self-help. There's a term for it, right? Which is, understanding how to say, I have a problem and I want actionable solutions. I don't want to talk in the abstract. I want to say, here's the 4 things here's the 3 ways to do this. Here's 7 things you need to think about. You do a great job, Clint, of applying that type of mentality to this hobby. And it makes you stand out. It's very, very unique. So for my listeners, if you want a great 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and you're going to get done with it, and Clint's going to close it out by saying, here's 4 things you need to think about. Here's 3 things that you can do. Claim to Game is phenomenal.
Thanks, Craig. My heart feels so full right now.
Well, as it should.
Cool. Well, dude, I had a blast. This is so much fun.
I did too, Clint. And the one thing that we need to make a promise to each other is that you're going to play in one of my horror games.
Oh my gosh. I'll leave my phobias at the door.
This is a lot of fun, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, Craig, for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience in what to consider when choosing a good fit game for your gaming table. And if you made it to the end of this episode, you are elite. And I do not want you to forget that if you want to explore some potential good fit games for your group, you should check out the free RPG quiz. Answer each question honestly, and it will guide you to one game that you may or may not have considered to run for your gaming table. Just click on the link in the show notes, bonus.claimtogamepodcast.com/free RPG quiz. Also, Craig convinced me. I'm now not only on Threads, but I have made my way on over to Blue Sky. Find me now at clintshire.bsky.social. Join us next time as we find the best ways to have great times with friends and experience amazing stories through tabletop role-playing.